At the start we meet Paul, who is taking some things from an abandoned house and runs from there. He is running and hiding from something and runs through the jungle and comes to a house. He is a father of 2 twin sons, and in this world, there are dangerous creatures which come out at night. Their mother passed away after their birth, and now 15 years later Paul's sons are big. Paul is waiting for his son Thomas to return from jungle, and Joseph is in the house. He is closing all windows and doors, and Paul is getting worried as it is getting dark. Joseph sees Thomas is coming, and Paul gets angry on him for coming late and being irresponsible. They both run to the house and close all remaining windows and doors and lock them. Paul double-checks all the doors and tells his son it's time for dinner, and they go upstairs. They say their prayer before eating, and Paul tells Thomas he won't allow him to go outside if he is late again. Thomas says he was helping people at the Rose farm and hence got late, and says he will be careful. Joseph teases his brother for being late, and they both argue and start fighting with each other. Paul stops them and asks if they are animals or humans, and they stop fighting. Later they play chess with each other and see their dog Rocco dig the ground to warn them. They understand the dog is warning them against creatures, and Thomas and Paul go downstairs with their gun. They see the door is locked but suddenly hear someone loudly banging the door. They hold the door but see the banging has increased and protect the door from breaking. Suddenly the creatures stop banging and go away, and Paul says they must check the door from outside in the morning. Thomas asks Joseph why he didn't come down to help them, and Joseph says he knew the door was locked. He says he noticed something and says the creatures knocked the door 3 times. First time for 10 seconds to test door's strength. Second time for 20 seconds to break the door, and third time for 1 second in frustration, and left the place. Next day Paul checks the door has many scratches and is badly damaged, and he notices some insects. He decides to replace the damaged wood, and he chops wood with his sons. Thomas asks if he can go to Rose farm, and Paul tells him to finish his work and go. Later Joseph is drawing something in his book, and Paul comes and asks what he has been building. Joseph says he is building a car to go outside and get work done easily, but is unable to start it. He says he is tired of hiding and wants to go outside, and Paul says he should not lose hope and soon their world will be free of these creatures. Paul checks the car and swaps some wires and gets it working, and Joseph is surprised to see this. Paul decides to teach driving to Joseph, and they take the car outside to a nearby hill. Joseph manages to learn some basics of driving and manages to drive the car. Paul asks them to go to river to find anything useful from nearby house and boats for the door. Thomas isn't happy as he wants to go to Rose farm, but Paul tells him to go with his brother. On the way, they both argue with each other, and Thomas decides to go to Rose farm. He says he will meet Joseph before sunset near the hill, and they go their separate ways. Thomas runs to the farm and meets Mr. and Mrs. Rose and their daughter Charlotte. Here at Rose farm many people live together, and Thomas comes here to help them. They both talk and flirt with each other, and Charlotte asks Thomas to come with her. Paul temporarily fixes the door, and Joseph arrives at the river and goes down a bridge using wire. He searches for something useful but finds nothing and is attacked by small black insects. Charlotte takes Thomas to her favorite tree, and they both play games to have fun and spend time. Later Thomas decides to leave as it is getting dark, and Charlotte hugs him and says goodbye. Joseph has managed to save himself from the insects and climbs up, but sees his car is not starting. Paul is getting worried as his sons have not returned, and Thomas is running fast to meet his brother. Joseph changes some wires and manages to start the car, and while running Thomas slips and falls. He falls in a deep underground cave, and Joseph does not find him at their meeting place and leaves. He thinks Thomas must have gone home, but after arriving Paul says Thomas has not come back. Paul decides to go in the jungle and look for Thomas and asks Joseph to lock the house down. He says he will come in the morning with Thomas and asks him not to leave the house. Paul and their dog Rocco leave to find Thomas, and Joseph locks all doors and windows. We see Thomas is injured in the cave and is unable to find any way out and use his lighter to find the creatures are near. Paul hears the creatures' sound and goes towards the cave, and Joseph hears the creatures outside his home. Paul goes down a different path and finds Thomas, and they decide to close the entrance and wait till morning. At night, when Joseph is sleeping, a creature manages to open a small window and puts his hand inside. He tries to reach Joseph and even extends his nails towards him, but is unable to reach him. It opens the door and comes inside, and Joseph gets up and activates a trap and captures it. In cave, Paul sees the creatures are trying to come inside from underground and tells Thomas. Paul uses an explosive to kill the creatures, but his hand gets stuck in a rock and he is badly injured. In morning, Joseph goes out to find Paul and his brother and takes the car towards the jungle. Thomas manages to get out of cave with Paul, and Joseph finds them in the jungle. Paul is unconscious and they both carry him to the car and drive back home and put him in bed. Thomas finds a cage covered in cloth, and Joseph tells he caught a creature using himself as bait. Thomas is surprised to hear this and says it is dangerous, but Joseph says the creatures are getting smarter and he needs to study them. Thomas says he killed many in the cave last night, and they decide to kill the creature in the cage. They open the cage and the creature hides under the bed to hide from light, but Rocco comes there and starts barking. The creature comes out of the bed and attacks the boys, and they manage to kill it with an axe. Joseph cuts the creature and sees it has many insects in it, and its claws are very sharp. Thomas suggests they should go to Rose's farm since they have medicines, but Joseph says they won't allow them to come inside. Thomas does not listen, and they put Paul in the car and go to Rose's farm, where the residents close the gate on seeing them. Mr. Rose says they can't let anyone injured stay here since they are low on medicines. He says Thomas can stay here as this will leave more supplies at their home for Paul and Joseph. Joseph tells Thomas he should stay here as he doesn't care of anyone and take any responsibility. He blames Thomas for his dad's condition, which makes Thomas angry, and they fight each other. Thomas decides to stay, and Joseph goes from there in his car, and Charlotte's parents feel guilty. Charlotte tells Thomas to eat something for strength and then takes him to his new room. They both talk with each other and kiss each other, and her father sees this and asks her to leave. While returning home, Joseph sees the sheep are restless and see many marks in the ground. He checks the ground and notices some creature movement is happening and prepares his defense. Thomas tries to find medicines, and Charlotte sees him, and Thomas says he can't stay here. Somebody hears this, and Thomas asks Charlotte for medicines, and she gives him, and Thomas leaves. While leaving, Thomas is stopped by a man who accuses him of stealing and running from here. Thomas explains that he got the medicines from Charlotte, but the man does not believe him and asks him to come inside. At night, Joseph locks the door and finds a big hole in the ground which the creatures have made. The men tie Thomas and decide to shoot him for stealing, but suddenly one man gets pulled down a hole. Charlotte's parents wake up hearing some noise and are attacked by the creatures. The creatures are big and black in color who jump on the father and kill him, and Charlotte's mother runs outside. Another creature comes and pushes her down and rapidly moves its jaws and attacks and kills her. Charlotte sees her parents have been killed, and Joseph asks for help to untie him, but no one listens. We see many creatures in a big circle coming to the farm and attack all the people there. Suddenly a creature comes to attack Thomas, but Charlotte comes there and shoots it and saves him. They decide to leave the farm, and Joseph has covered the hole with furniture and checks on Paul. Suddenly Joseph hears some noise and goes to check it and finds someone is at the door. He sees Thomas and Charlotte have come, and he opens the door for them and sees they are scared. They tell him about the farm attack, and Thomas gives him the medicines and says sorry. Joseph says he alone can't take care of Dad, and they see Paul is conscious and give him medicine. Joseph says the creatures have dug holes and will attack them at night, and Paul tells them to fight. They all go to garage and take many things to prepare for attack, and take a large box also. They go inside the house with many gasoline cans, and Joseph tells he needs 10 minutes to prepare his trap. Thomas and Charlotte cover the door with wood, and Joseph pours the gasoline on the ground. Thomas notices the ground is shaking, and Joseph lights a cigarette and keeps it on his trap to ignite it. The creatures come down the chimney and through the hole and attack Joseph. Charlotte uses her gun to kill one creature, and they run upstairs where they meet Joseph. He says he needs more time to prepare his trap, and they carry a large box in a room. Paul gets up and takes the gun from Charlotte and sees many creatures are coming towards them. Everyone starts fighting the creatures, and Paul notices he can't save all from the creatures. He locks his sons and Charlotte in a room and decides to fight the creatures on his own to give them more time for the trap. Joseph is sad and tries to tell Paul to open the door, but Paul doesn't listen and remembers their childhood. Paul, Thomas, and Charlotte hide in the big box, and a big explosion happens because of the fire. Everyone outside the box is killed, and they open the box and run outside towards their car. They start their car and run from there and notice big circle of creatures chasing them. Charlotte fires her gun and kills the creatures, and next morning they decide to leave from there. They build graves for their parents and thank them for their sacrifice, and decide to find other survivors like them. Thomas and Joseph forgive each other and hug, and they leave from there with Charlotte.